Hey, I'm Transtastic, my name is Luke, and this week's topic is how we relate to our culture. Now, this is a very interesting topic for me because I have a very unique relationship with my culture in that I actually am a third culture kid, and I grew up in a country outside of the culture of my parents. For those of you who don't know, I am originally from Australia. My family is from Adelaide, which is in South Australia. We moved to Hong Kong when I was about a year old, a little bit over a year old, and I grew up in Hong Kong, and I lived in Hong Kong for my entire childhood, and I started boarding school in Adelaide when I was about 12. So from the age of about 12 to about 17, I would fly backwards and forwards between Hong Kong and Australia, study in Australia, and then I'd go home to Hong Kong for the holidays. So I was kind of backwards and forwards. And then when I turned 18, I moved to rural Victoria and worked and lived there for a year. And then I moved to Melbourne, and I've lived in Melbourne ever since then. So since 2015, I've been living in Melbourne. So my story is a little bit different to other people's, and I don't have the same situation as most people in that when you look at me, you don't see my experience with my culture, and you do not see the experiences that I've had. And in some ways that's very difficult, and in some ways I feel almost like it's very much like being stealth. My culture is a lot more complex and a lot more multifaceted than it appears to be. Besides, when I open my mouth, and I obviously have an accent that's not an Australian accent, and people still ask me where I'm from, no one expects Hong Kong. Never. No one expects Hong Kong because I'm obviously white. My culture has always been a really weird situation in that I'm never quite enough for either. I don't quite feel like I'm Australian, and I don't feel like I can call myself Australian honestly, because I didn't grow up in Australia, and I've never really identified with Australia as my home, ever. Apart from potentially now being in Melbourne. I've been settled here for a couple years now. I guess I consider Melbourne my home, but Hong Kong is my childhood home, and Hong Kong is where I grew up. So on one hand, I don't really feel like I'm Australian enough, and I don't really feel like I can call myself Australian, or that, Australian culture really resonates with me. I kind of call myself Australian out of necessity and out of ease, because I don't want to sit there and tell everyone my life story. I'm an Australian resident, I'm an Australian citizen, and I've got Australian written in my passport, so I guess I am Australian, but I don't feel Australian. So for most people who know me, I don't consider myself Australian, I don't call myself Australian, but majority of the time I just tell people I'm Australian just because it's easier and it just makes sense. But at the same time, I don't really feel like I can call myself as someone who's from Hong Kong, because I feel like my experience is so different. I can't speak Cantonese. I'm obviously white. I went to an international school. I lived in a very western section of Hong Kong where a lot of expatriates live, so a majority of my friends were expatriate. My experience still isn't that of a typical person from Hong Kong, so I don't really relate to that either. My culture is very much a weird, unique combination of the two. I'm not from Hong Kong, but I'm also not from Australia. I'm from both. That is more important to me as either one of the whole, and that's why it's called being a third culture kid, third culture person. Their culture, their specific culture, and how they feel about themselves in both of those situations is unique to whichever country you're in. I feel like I relate to other people who grew up in both cultures than I do people who grew up in Australia or who grew up in Hong Kong, even if they grew up in cultures that I have no idea about. If I met someone who grew up in Malaysia but they're from the States, I feel like I've got more in common with them and that I can relate to them more, and that our cultures are more aligned than someone who grew up in Australia or someone who grew up in Hong Kong, because that shared cultural inconsistency is more representative of my experience than either of the actual cultures of Hong Kong and Australia. And it's very difficult for me to talk about in words, because it's an experience, and it's an experience that most other people don't experience, and it's an experience that has really shaped who I am as a person. It's made me a lot more multicultural. It's made me obviously able to travel a lot more and experience the world, which I'm very privileged to do so. It's made me aware of my privilege. It's made me aware of my white privilege. It's made me aware of how societies in different cultures are very different. Growing up in a culture where I am the minority, even though I am white, I was bullied for being white. I was treated differently because of my differences. So in some ways I can kind of relate, but also I'm white, so I don't experience systematic racism that, seen in the States and things like that. And I've never claimed that, people were racist to me. But like, I have experienced similar things, and because of that, that's made me more empathetic, and that's made me more understanding of minorities. And obviously combined with me being trans, I'm very well aware of what privilege plays and how privilege plays. Because like how I went from being seen as female to being seen as male, I also went from being seen as a white person in Hong Kong to a white person in Australia, and they're very different experiences. Seeing other people from Hong Kong being treated differently to me, even though I'm also from Hong Kong, because they are not white, is something that's a weird experience to experience. I'm very grateful for it, and in fact I'm probably more grateful, and I think it shaped me more than me being trans, and that's saying something, because being trans has shaped me in so many ways. I really appreciate being able to celebrate the things that I celebrated as a child, experiencing culture through celebration, but also at the same time acknowledging that I don't have a typical experience, and for me, I'm always going to experience that as someone that is an outsider. I'm never going to be able to experience my culture as an insider, no matter if I'm in Australia or if I'm in Hong Kong, because if I'm in Australia, I don't feel like I fit in. If I'm in Hong Kong, I don't look like I should fit in. So I never really do. And that can be very isolating. I'll say a story, for example. I remember when I was at boarding school and there was a Chinese New Year feast. So basically the boarding house decided that they were gonna let all of the people who were Chinese to go to this Chinese New Year feast. My friend was invited because she's Thai. I wasn't invited. I wasn't allowed in because I was white. And yeah, you're from Hong Kong, but you know, like, you don't really count. Even though my friend's Thai. Just because she's Asian does not mean she celebrates Chinese New Year, and she didn't. She was like, why the fuck am I invited to this and you're not? That sort of thing is something that I've experienced a lot. Never really fitting in either place, and never really being seen as someone who belongs. And that's definitely affected me in many ways and has made me really conscious of fitting in and finding a community that I belong to, and is why I find it so difficult to find a community I belong to. Because my whole life, I've always been one foot in two different places. I've never completely committed to either, and I've never really been able to completely commit to either, and that's really affected the way I see the world. I hope this makes sense. I'm really glad that we had this topic. I'm actually really happy with how I actually articulated myself in this video, because usually I kind of finish filming and I'm like, oh, I didn't say what I wanted to say, but I think I did say what I wanted to say this time. I hope this was interesting. If you have any questions about my experience, or like if you want to know more about things like that, I might make more videos about this sort of thing on my personal channel, because I've been meaning to talk about this on my personal channel as well. And if you want to see more of me just in general, my personal channel is down below. I'm trying really hard to upload more consistently because I haven't been uploading as consistently because I'm stealth and my YouTube channel was showing up when you Google my name, and now it doesn't. So now I'm able to post whenever the fuck I want, and it's awesome. So if you want to see more videos of me, down below. I don't usually self-plug, but you know, I'm just gonna do it now because I don't know if people are aware that my situation's changed. Anyway, I will see you guys next week. Bye.